Yeah, think of a card. Think of a card. Any card. Is your card the get well soon?
All right, we're just waiting, everyone, for the show to go live on both YouTube and LinkedIn. LinkedIn takes a bit longer than YouTube, so we'll let you know when it's live, so we don't waste any words. Right, but good news for me. It's live on YouTube. David's book, Thriving at Nature's Pace, has arrived. Richard's hasn't.
Mine has not.
But mine has. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it, David. And I'm loving the interviews with your mum. She's very cute.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I do that every morning for anybody wanting to join our YouTube channel, Rethinking Choices. And it's live.
A very nice experience. I'm sure she's appreciating it.
Yes, she's very, very astute at pointing to the important things along with it. And,
okay, we are live on LinkedIn. All right.
Welcome
to the Shit Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's David Coe.
I am Richard Bussolato, bottom left this week.
And my name is Joe Augustin. Welcome to the Shit Show, as Andrea said. And this is your weekly reminder that the polycrisis isn't just a theory, it's the news cycle. Tonight, we've got a lineup that sounds like someone fed a panic attack into an auto cue, catastrophic floods across Asia that barely register in the global north, but wipe out food supplies for millions. Australia is test driving no social media for teens, while Meta apparently runs its apps like a slot machine for child safety. Japan's doing something with bond yields that has the financial world going, what the F is going on? And the Southern Ocean quietly is preparing a massive heat burp that could restart global warming even if we get our act together. Also, your retirement savings are helping bankroll fossil fuel expansion. Bird flu is auditioning to be the worst COVID ever. And Tennessee just set up a bad signal that even in the deep red of America, that something is shifting. And if that's not a polycrisis, at least it's a pretty decent midlife crisis for the planet. Now, before we drown in all of this and do the same thing, hit subscribe, like, whatever it is that you do to tell your friends you like something online, the live stream, maybe share the YouTube link. The algorithms, of course, maybe in the meantime, destroying democracy, but they can at least boost our show today. Now, before the world is literally on fire, as well as metaphorically on fire, we've also brought in someone who actually knows what they're talking about. A very special guest is an award-winning investigative journalist focused on environmental, health, and human rights issues. She's fresh off winning the SEAL Award for her reporting, and she's been exposing corporations and governments tearing up the Amazon and the human rights abuses against indigenous communities, and how all of this loops back to our food, health, and security. And yes, also the price of your coffee, that fabulous coffee. We're going to dig into COP30, the UK National Emergency Briefing, agribusiness, food security, climate contradictions, and why delay now comes with a price tag that could make your super funds blush. And because we and also because we talk too long, some of this might not get covered in the actual show. But enough of this. It's time to get into it as we bring on our guest for today, Monica Piccinini.
Hi.
Here she is. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on your show. Thank you so much. Looking forward.
We really appreciate it. And we know as a journalist, you don't usually sit in the interviewee seat. So we know this isn't a comfort zone for you. But do you want to just share a little bit more about yourself that Joe didn't sort of mention?
Yeah, as you mentioned, my work focuses on the environment with a particular emphasis on the Amazon rainforest and the major projects planned for the region, including the reconstruction of a big highway called the BR319 highway. I also report on pesticides, health, as you said, human rights, and I have also an interest on biotech and geoengineering. I'm non-partisan and independent, with no affiliations to any organization and no conflicts of interest influencing my work. So I'm pretty independent on the things I write.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of hate based on the work you do?
Sorry, do I get a lot of
hate? Attacks.
Hate you.
Oh, hate, yes. I'm really sorry. Yes. Often, not that often, but it has happened before.
Yeah.
I've been hacked a few times when I was doing my work on BR319 and didn't know where it was coming from. I'm not a techie person, but yes, I've had it in the past. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I could imagine, especially
Normal.
also being a female as well, right?
This makes things much worse.
Yeah.
You know, especially in Brazil, for instance, the far right movement is growing by the minute, and usually comes from that.
Yeah.
Easy.
Well, we appreciate the work you're doing. It's very, very important. All right, let's get into the interview because I know that your time is tight, and you're originally from Brazil, living in the UK, but I know you weren't at COP30, but let's start with just maybe your takeaways from the event.
Yes, COP30. So let's just be honest, Andrea. COP30 in Berlin ended up being a huge disappointment, and not just in a could have been better way, but in the same pattern we've seen from almost every single COP. A lot of big talk and not much real action. So Brazil wanted to use COP30 to show the world it's really serious about climate leadership, but at home the story is quite different. The government is pushing in the complete opposite direction. There's this bill called the Devastation Bill that weakens environmental licensing. Also, they are moving ahead with projects like the reconstruction of the BR319 highway, cutting deeper into the Amazon. And in June this year, Brazil auctioned 172 offshore oil blocks, including in 47 locations close to the Amazon River. And it did so without proper consultation of the indigenous and traditional communities, which is illegal under international law and under Brazilian law too. And instead of saying clearly, you know, we've all seen, instead of saying clearly, no more fossil fuels, the final COP30 text avoided the one thing we really needed, we desperately needed, but to phase them out, you know, basically a binding plan to phase them out. And there were no dates, no roadmap, just pretty much vague promises. Meanwhile, carbon credits, biofuels, and the so-called the bioeconomy, they are sold as climate solutions, right? But most of them are just smoke and mirrors. They let big polluters keep polluting while claiming, you know, they're net zero. It's just, I think, in my view, it's a financial game, and there's no climate action. So, and I would like to mention that the people who were there at COP30, 1 in every 25 people attending COP30 was a fossil fuel lobbyist. I think it was a total of 1,600. Agribusiness was there too, even though 80% of Amazon deforestation is driven by agribusiness. So the agriculture document at COP30 was even based on false claims, making it sound like, you know, pesticides and industrial farming are necessary to end hunger, even though Brazil is already the world's largest pesticide consumer, which is crazy. And yet, despite all this destruction, agribusiness is celebrated because it represents about 22% of Brazil's GDP when you include the whole food chain. And this is according to the World Bank data. So yeah, COP30 was supposed to restore credibility, but instead it just exposed, I think, hypocrisy. And it's hard to solve the climate crisis when the people causing it are running the entire show, as we've all seen. So, and as you've discussed this during your previous show, it was confirmed once again by during the briefing in London by Tim Lenton that the coral reefs have already gone, right? So are we now going to be watching the Amazon go too and other regions? I mean, this is a big question, right?
It's yeah. I just feel so sorry for the children, right? They're sitting there in despair, and these things happen. So people might think it's sort of maybe strange that we decided to talk about the UK National Emergency Briefing, which you attended. But I think it's an important conversation because it's got global application, and also the UK's been great for a long time in speaking about what's going on. So you published a piece in the Canary, which we're sort of going to pick out some of those points that you made. But can we go through a few of the key takeaways that you took from that event, as well as maybe sort of the overall message and how you think it landed? Because there were a lot of politicians in the room, weren't there?
Yes, there were. I think initially, I think there were 63, and then someone said it was 150. I was sitting right behind them, actually.
Great.
So yes, yes, and the UK climate briefing really, I think it hit hard. The message, the overall message was basically, we're running out of time, pretty much, and the consequences are already here. You know, we're going to see much, much worse, but the consequences we're seeing across the globe. So the scientists and experts were incredibly clear. We have solutions. We do have solutions. We know exactly what needs to be done, but our governments are still dragging their feet. And we know this. People in the room really felt the urgency. It wasn't like doom. It was more like a wake-up call for everyone. But the question remains whether politicians will really follow through. You know, that's the real questions. The question, they were all listening, they're all nodding, but are they going to do anything about it? So that's the big question.
Yeah. All right. So in the article, you talk a lot about climate contradictions. Can you explain that for everyone to understand?
Sure. Climate contradictions are everywhere. So the UK government, for instance, and this is not just the UK, but the UK government, for example, talks about cutting emissions, and then it approves new oil and gas projects, not just in the UK, but in regions like Brazil. Okay, BP and Shell are expanding there in the Santos Basin. So they talk about food security as well, and yet we depend heavily on food grown in countries hit hardest by the crisis. So it's like living in two realities at once. We know we must stop burning fossil fuels, but we keep expanding them abroad. So we know industrial farming is destroying our ecosystems, but we treat it as the only option. So the contradiction is what's killing us. We need to face the reality and be transparent about it.
Yeah. Just the building of the houses in the UK, right? Just that will take up all of the UK's emissions budget, you know, and they're going ahead. So,
exactly.
It's just. So one of the things that I always, you know, you hear people say, "Oh, but what about China?" And I'm like, yeah, but your country is consuming so much of the stuff that's made in China. So, do you think it's beyond time that we started to list our country's emissions based on what we consume globally versus what we consume locally? Because I think that's a part of the story that's not really being understood.
Absolutely. I think, yes, 100%. Because right now, rich countries can look cleaner simply by outsourcing their pollution. For instance, if the UK imports food, clothes, and goods, you know, linked to deforestation and fossil fuels, those emissions should count too, don't you think? Yeah. We need to measure emissions both where things are made and where they are consumed. Otherwise, we're just shifting the blame around the planet, you know, while emissions just keep going up. You know, we need to be transparent about the entire chain.
And not taking responsibility for ourselves. All right. So we talk a lot about food security, and you've already mentioned it, and it's probably, I know for Richard, we talk about it, we're really concerned. So,
yes,
you know, we had these massive, devastating storms in Asia that barely got a mention. Like last week when we were talking about it, even Joe wasn't really aware of it, and he's in Singapore, right? But so I think people have started to pay more attention. But one of the things is it's a massive rice growing region, fruits and vegetables, all those things everyone loves, and then of course coffee and tea. I bought some coffee 2 weeks ago, and it's gone up $7 since the storms, by the way. So there's a direct hit. But the UK has a massive dependency on. It's more than 50% of its food comes from overseas, and there's another article in the Guardian talking about the drought impact on the UK. Just came out just yesterday, I think. So what's the UK's dependency on food outside its borders? And just more broadly, what do you think countries need to be doing now to address food insecurity?
Yes, honestly, we're all very vulnerable, not just the UK, I think the entire globe. And as you said, look what's happening to Asia now, all these devastating storms wiping out rice, fruit, coffee. We rely on those imports every single day. The UK, as you said, doesn't grow enough food to feed itself. We depend heavily on other countries, about 50%, if not more. And those countries are getting hammered by climate impacts. So we must support small-scale farmers and local food production. But even that won't save us if we don't slash emissions urgently. Climate change is already damaging agriculture everywhere, including here in the UK. So it means no farms, no food, no health. It's just that simple. Yeah.
I'm just sorry. You guys need to check out the comments. I'm not sure when they're coming in. I'm just trying to find Genevieve W. The various countries are violating their own national, and then also it's been legally required for over 8 years, but it hasn't been done. And Ollie's here saying hi, but he hasn't popped up in the chat yet. All right, so let's talk about the global impact of agribusiness on the environment and what we need to be thinking about there. Yes,
agribusiness is often presented as the hero that feeds the entire world. But the reality is very different. It's one of the biggest drivers of environmental destruction worldwide, including deforestation, soil degradation, water pollution, emissions, the whole lot. Okay, take the Amazon as the most shocking example. 80% of the deforestation there is driven by agribusiness, okay? Mainly cattle farming and industrial crops. Yet the world, and this includes the UK, keeps importing beef, soy, palm oil, and other commodities linked to deforestation, okay? And this system is harming human health too, okay? Not just the environment. For instance, when we confine huge numbers of animals in tight little spaces, we're basically creating virus factories. And that's how new infectious diseases emerge, okay? Livestock are pumped with antibiotics to promote growth and keep them disease-free. So in these tiny little cramped, stressful environments, and that's powering the rise of antimicrobial resistance, which is called AMR. It's projected to kill more people by 2050 than cancer, diabetes, and respiratory disease combined, okay? We're now seeing also resistance to colistin. What's colistin? Is the last resort antibiotic for humans. Once colistin stops working, we're in real trouble. So on the top of that, the industrial diet that this system feeds us, which is meat heavy, packed with sugar, fat, and ultra processed foods, is being linked to type 2 diabetes, heart disease, depression, obesity, several cancers, and even immune disorders. And it doesn't stop there, Andrea. Toxic pesticides and microplastics accumulate inside our bodies and our ecosystems too. So agribusiness isn't just threatening the planet's health, it's threatening our health too. So we really need a massive shift. We need to stop deforestation-linked imports. We need to support agroecology. We must reduce meat consumption urgently and bring food production back to a scale that really respects us as people and also nature. Yeah,
and I just saw the EU has announced it's stripping back its deforestation pledge. So, yeah, we're not doing the right things.
No.
So, the other side of agribusiness, which I was just going to say, Matthew's just said, Genevieve, the expenditure for the fine is cheaper than the expenditure for the reporting compliance, and that's 100%, right? But that's a massive problem. But yeah, so there's this other side of things, and I've talked about it before. When I was in Bangalore, I noticed how much the local farmers have been pushed out so these skyscrapers can be built for the tech industry, right? Which means that there's no self-reliance with food anymore, and over time you lose the skills, the farming skills. So we've got these big agribusinesses, right? So they're going to crash because they're businesses that rely on the climate. So there's no question that is coming. So when they crash, there is not only going to be a food security issue, it's going to have a massive and immediate economic impact. And because they've bought out the local farming, we're losing the skills to feed ourselves. So this is something that I've been really sort of concerned about for a long time. So I'm just wondering, are you starting to hear this conversation, or is it not being discussed yet?
It's been discussed for a long, long time, but no one seems to be listening. No one seems to be listening. We have a huge issue here, which is called power. Okay, our food system is controlled by a handful of gigantic corporations, and when that much power is concentrated, we become incredibly vulnerable. Okay, right now, 4 giant traders control 80% of global grains market. So they're the so-called ABCD firms, which is Archer Daniels Midland, Bunge, Cargill, and Dreyfus. And we have 4 mega food companies dominating what ends up on supermarket shelves, which is Nestle, what do you call, PepsiCo, Anheuser-Busch InBev, and JBS. Okay. And investment giants like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and Capital Group own shares across nearly the entire global food chain. Okay, it was estimated it's worth 20 trillion in assets. Okay, that means profit, and a lot of it. not nutrition, not sustainability, not resilience, and not health. It's what drives our food systems at the moment. And here's where it gets really scary. Climate change is already cutting into food production through heat waves, floods, superstorms, and failing harvests. If those global companies suddenly can't supply food, Andrea, they collapse. And when they collapse, the world goes hungry. Pretty much, it's simple. And why? Because small-scale farmers, the people who know how to feed us, they put food on our table, okay? They have been pushed aside. In Brazil, for example, 2.8% of landowners control more than 56% of arable land. So they're the big landowners, the big landowners. So meanwhile, half of all the small farmers have access to just 2.5% of the land, which is tiny. We've allowed local food systems to be hollowed out in favor, the global agribusiness. So if the global supply chain breaks and climate change guarantees it will break, we won't have a backup plan. So this is really, really scary where we're heading. And the solution is there. We're not listening to it, basically. Yeah,
it's amazing how much risk we've got. So we're doing pretty well for time. So because we've got 2 people that pay attention to the money side. Richard, do you want to give you a little bit of a break? Richard, do you want to just sort of jump in with a few thoughts here?
Absolutely, because what you're describing is exactly the thought process David and I articulated, but you're coming from a slightly different angle. But the end result is the same. I strongly think that, and here I'm talking the Western society, not necessarily the developing world, we are effectively addicted to cheap food.
Yes.
You have seen in countries, like the UK, your average household going from spending 40-50% of disposable income after the war to now wanting to spend 10% on food. That is not sustainable if you think it's more important to have a Netflix subscription than eating proper food. You need to get back into the mentality that actually what you eat is really, really important. And it's probably worth spending the extra money to ensure that you have a higher quality product on the table when you sit down to have dinner.
Exactly.
Unless we change that mindset, we are not going to tackle these issues. Because at the moment, the giant farming corporations, the big food suppliers are satisfying a need which is borne out by effectively the idea that politicians have grounded in us as well, that food should be as cheap as possible. It's a really idiotic idea, because when you drive it towards that end point, you're going to cut corners. That's how you get cheap food.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cheap everything.
Yeah. You just accept that, it's probably the most important thing you consume in your life is what you eat. Isn't it worth spending more on it?
Yeah.
Yes.
But from a risk perspective, I mean, okay, the governments are ignoring climate change risks, but this is such a tangible risk, right? Sorry, I just said Matthew said beautifully said rich, which is why I said rich. it's such a massive risk. It's like it's beyond me how we're still sitting in this space, not talking about it, not addressing it. Not just food, but all of it.
May I make a suggestion? Richard, you're very, very good at that. I read a great book, and I read it twice, by Chris Van Toleken. I don't know whether you've heard of him. He's a British doctor, and he wrote a book called Ultra Processed People. Very, very interesting, very it's worth reading. And it's based on the works of a Brazilian scientist called Carlos Monteiro. He is the one who created the novel classification of food when he classifies ultra processed foods. So really, really worth reading. It's called Ultra Processed People by
Making
Chris.
a note.
Yeah, there's definitely, when it comes to ultra processed food, there's definitely more coming out just in the last couple of weeks around that issue. Yeah. So finally,
and these are effectively the things we should be debating. If we have a protein conversion, which is you can eat protein by eating the soya beans, but actually you want to eat animal protein. That's what happens when society gets richer. The conversion into beef is horrific. The conversion into chicken is actually quite effective. Poultry is a great way of eating animal protein because they grow much quicker with what they eat. That needs to be reflected in prices. And, maybe Sunday roast with the beef will be a real treat, not something you do every week. But we need that mindset to accept that we cannot demand lower and lower prices for our food, because then the people providing it will keep on cutting corners. It's really simple.
I mean, I think I'd like to interject a little bit. I mean, Richard and I wrote this book called The Unsustainable Truth.
Okay.
And in it, we talk from the investment side of how our pension money and our investment money is pushing for the cheapening of the products and everything that you talk about. So from the side of what Richard and we go through the different stages between how the world actually works from that perspective to the psychological triggers that the advertising pushes us on, and the government policies by which it feels itself compelled to be part of this aspect in order to provide for what we want here. So it's a lot deeper than simply saying, this is my food, I want it to be good, because it will find a way to bring you back, because the driver of it is your own pension, and you care about what that investment is going to produce for you. And the reality is there's more money being contributed each month into the world in that way than there is actual opportunities for good investments that can work. Now, the reason why there is more than that is because a typical UK pension fund is about £5 billion. 1% is $50 million. Sorry, pounds, or call it dollars. It's pretty much the same. I tend to speak in dollars, but $1 million in. So 100th of a percent of that essentially is like what was a 500,000 in that way. For the kind of investments that actually go into these, the local small scale farms and those sort of people and what they need, they often need even less than that in order to get them going and do that. So as far as the manager of this £5 billion is concerned, or $5 billion, is they're too small and not manage 10,000 different things.
Yes.
I can manage 20. So all the businesses get bigger. Everything becomes more mechanized in that way, in order for the money to be able to manage it from the perspective of, if I've now got so much money in this is how I can do it. So it's not just enough to go and say, well, you've got to be careful about what you eat and all the rest of it, because the pressure is coming from the money that you're investing. Yeah. You also have to actually say, how do I want to be spending my money and investing that? So that I don't go and create the psychological pressure on myself. Because that's where that psychological pressure comes from. The advertising is paid for by your investments.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And by the way, that's the other book. The book truth.
Another one.
That's the first.
This area. So when I read that book, David and Richard's book, it really sort of exploded my mind that it's a conversation that we're not having enough. That we're all in this loop. We're all in this system. We're all paying into it in some form or another. But let's get back on to the questions, because I want to make sure we've got your time. So we've been talking about processed foods, and the health impacts are starting to come up. It was also a big topic at the briefing, and they're obviously talking about it from a disease perspective. The only country on the earth apparently that doesn't have mosquitoes is Iceland now. Joe and I are here in Singapore. We practice mosquito health, and it's when I lived in Thailand, I was basically covered in DEET pretty much every day, because you don't want to get dengue. You certainly don't want to get malaria, right? So that's now a risk in the Northern Hemisphere. The other big topic, of course, is heat extremes, and we talked about this last week, and the numbers. There's really no handle on that. So, what were your biggest takeaways? Sorry, from the health and medical perspective. What? Yeah, David.
Just as a point, Iceland mosquitoes have been discovered in Iceland in October
for the first time.
Okay, so it's 100%. Maybe Antarctica and the Arctic, right?
Yes.
They'll resist a bit longer, I suspect, but will happen there too.
Yeah.
So yes, mosquitoes. Yes, heat waves. We all know. First of all, heat waves and droughts are taking lives too across the globe, right? In the UK, according to the UK Health Security Agency, over 1,300 heat-related deaths happened in England in 2024. It's a big number alone, with a projection to reach over 10,000 by 2050, okay? Additionally, climate change is also transforming health risks right now, especially through disease. When we cut down forests, like for instance in the Amazon, or expand mining and livestock farming, and we bring humans closer to wildlife, okay? That makes spillover events happen, where new diseases jump to humans from much more likely. So and now the warming temperatures are helping those diseases spread. And we've seen this, okay? Brazil is an example, and it's a stark warning. If you have an idea, over 6.5 million dengue cases and over 6,000 deaths were reported in 2024, carried by the dengue mosquito, okay? This mosquito thrives in hotter, wetter environments created by global warming. And dengue isn't alone, okay? We're seeing now more cases of Zika, of chikungunya, of malaria, yellow fever, and also another one, oropouche. I don't know whether you've heard about oropouche, which initially it started in a deforestation hotspot in the Amazon known as Amacro. The Amacro region is namely after the states of the Amazon, Amazonas, Acre, and Rondônia. And it's spread across the country to the states on the other side of the country. In Espírito Santo state, which recorded 6,300 cases this year alone. And in Rio de Janeiro, with nearly 3,000 cases. And this is happening because of global warming, because of deforestation, and also degradation of our ecosystems. So every step we take deeper into the natural world opens a door to, more diseases, and possibly even new pandemics may emerge from them. So, and this isn't tracked properly in much of the global south. So the actual official numbers are likely, a huge underestimate. So they are likely to be much higher than this. And this is something we should be paying attention to.
Yeah. What's the symptoms of that mosquito infection?
Like you have with dengue, it's high fever. Sometimes it depends on the person. How they feel unwell. Vomiting. I think the basic symptoms of the infection. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we've heard about that flesh-eating horrible bug that's moved up into the US again. That's sort of traveled north. Yeah. So. I mean, it's like while the UK isn't on the front line of the heat, 10,000 is still a lot for a place like the UK. I was estimating. So in Africa, they said between 100 and 200 people died during heat extremes, which is just ridiculous because 157,000 died in Europe, right?
Yeah.
So I was doing some maths, and it could be anywhere between 300 and 400,000 people of dying during these extreme heat events, but we have no data. Right.
Yeah, this is the thing. Data is difficult to have, especially in a global south, and especially in places like the Amazon. How are you going to gather data in communities that you can't reach, or is with difficult access? This is very, very hard. The same thing happened during the COVID pandemic. We didn't have accurate data.
Yeah.
I mean, for regions, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ollie's just popped up. He's asked about the BR319. I know that's a passion for him. We mentioned it briefly, but is there anything that you want to talk about from there? There was some misinformation about that. It was claimed to have been built for COP, but it actually wasn't built for COP.
It's a different road. The one that's being built for COP is like a 13-kilometer road. BR319 is another road that cuts through from Manaus to to the south. But basically, it's an 885-kilometer road, not 13-kilometer. So this is going to cut through the Amazon, and it's going to be have devastating effects. Diseases, name it. Malaria cases across BR319 have jumped up 400%. So yes, the devastation is clear, and basically a 50-kilometer of the highway has been approved for. They are already reconstructing it. It's called Locked C, and now they want to pave the rest, the remaining 402, I think, kilometers, and it looks like they are pushing hard for this. And the devastation bill that's just been approved is going to help them do that. And it's mainly catastrophic. If this road is rebuilt, we can wave goodbye to the Amazon rainforest. And we can wave goodbye to the flying rivers that take humidity across Brazil and other regions in South America, and it will destabilize the climate across the globe. And this is serious. And we should be paying attention more to this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I agree with what Ollie said.
It's not me; it's the scientists. This is basically data coming from real science, and it's not me.
Yeah.
So, by the way, just want to add again, the symptoms of dengue fever is basically pain. So that's it.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
So,
yeah.
I wasn't talking about dengue. I was talking about the other virus that you were talking about. I hadn't heard about what was it? So dengue is called, what is something death? It's like it's your whole body aches.
Your joints, everything really hurts.
Actually, I was in hospital once with my mother who was going through cancer treatment, and there was this young girl next to me, and she had dengue, and she was in agony. You're right, and this was like a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So defense and national security. So we've heard that the head of the Department of War is taking all references to climate change off any defense websites or information sites, which is really crazy because the defense forces in the US were one of the first to really talk about climate change because so many of their bases around the world are at risk. So defense and national security is obviously a massive issue when it comes to what we're talking about today. So you had some experts in that area. What were some of the big takeaways, or what got your attention?
Yes, approximately 20 to 25% of people living in living in areas affected by heat, droughts, floods will be forced to relocate. Okay, this is a bigger number than what we previously thought. This will drive migration. It will stress economies and create more polarization and conflicts, more than what we're already seeing, which is crazy. And as Lieutenant General Richard Nuggy, it's his name, the general who was one of the speakers at the event, at the briefing, he said, what concerns the most is not any single crisis. Like you said, it's a polycrisis. It's crisis cascading together. It's the multiple crises like food, health, infrastructure, migration, energy, extreme weather, all hitting at the same time. And it's pretty scary if this happens. We won't be able to cope with it. Yeah.
Well, we need to make a decision whether to come together to cope with it, right? It's that's we don't have to go down the dystopian path, but we seem to be. All right, and obviously there's loads more that we could be talking about, but the cost of delay was obviously a big discussion point. So the longer we wait, the higher the cost. So can you share some of the numbers that they discussed?
Yes, well, the longer we wait, it just says, as you said, the more expensive everything will become. It's already costing lives and billions in damages, and that number will keep rising. Every year delay multiplies the economic hit, like to infrastructure, to healthcare, to food, to stability. The Lancet Countdown report, I don't know whether you've had a chance to access the report, is really interesting. It estimates that extreme heat already wiped 639 billion working hours globally in 2024, and more than $1 trillion in lost income. I mean, $1 trillion is a lot of money. According to the economist Angela Francis, who was one of the speakers at the briefing, she says that the faster transition saves $12 trillion compared to staying on fossil fuels, basically. So, we must, the transition is important, is essential, and we're going to be paying a high price, and our economies are going to just go down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've agreed that Richard doesn't want to lose any of his wealth, but I don't think he's going to have any choice. All right, so before we wrap up, I want to hand it over to you guys. If you've got any questions, Joe, you've been quiet. Do you want to jump in with anything, or are you happy to listen?
Well, the challenge that I find myself thinking about is, the thing about when we talk about big companies sort of not, they're being hailed as heroes, but they're not. I'm just wondering whether there's a way for this to work out so that they can continue to do some of the good things. And I mean, why can't it be true in both ways as well? As in, why not solve the solution in terms of feeding the world, and at the same time just improve the behavior that goes along with that? I mean, it sounds very often it's existential. It's like you have to die, or we have to destroy you to stop doing what you're doing so that we can not have this problem. When I find sometimes it's more like a family dynamic where you've got somebody who's behaving rather badly, and you need an intervention. But sometimes they continue in their roles, but they do it better. So I know we don't hold that much hope for that, but what signs do we have that something like that might be happening?
Well, in my view, I don't want to sound like a doomer, but it's hard to see, effective change at the moment. I'm really disappointed, because, for instance, if you think of climate change, it's not really popular among those voters, not just in the UK, but across the globe. I mean, is it popular? No, it's not. So if you think politicians go along with topics that will get them elected, so if climate change is not popular among those voters, they're not going to be talking about this, right? And it goes along with the media, because they need to sell their stories. So it's just a vicious circle. And we need to change that, and we need to change the way our mindsets. We need to be able to do some sacrifices in our lives, but our leaders need to be held accountable for this, because they're making the decisions, and we are just feel quite powerless.
Yeah, I think it would. Yeah, I think it would also help if no leaders or business leaders were sitting in the dark triad, personality sort of characters. David?
I think there's more to that. I mean, this is the essence of my new book, Thriving at Nature's Pace. Money we have, it says on it, I promise to pay the bearer, the sum of £1, meaning £1 of gold, as it were, is fundamentally extractive. Because that's what you get from going out there and extracting from nature in that way. So that's how our money works in this form. And in that way, it's extremely prescriptive about the outcome we want. So that's how the investments world work. I make this return. Richard and I used to talk to this mining company, big mining company. And the issue was, how do we meet the prescribed returns in that way? And nature is actually much more emergent. So the subtitle of the book is Emergent Economics for Oil and Gas and Coal. So, and that switch is a difficult one.
Yes.
Because that means we have to have faith in the future without having to prescribe how we're going to get it. And that transition lies at the core of why we can't actually get there with the money system that we have currently. It doesn't matter what your intentions are. The whole point about the unsustainable truth is that it doesn't actually matter what your intentions are. As long as you're that prescriptive about it, you're going to wash away your intention through the unintended consequences of what that means. Because you drive it at your pace of your intention, and so you don't allow everything else to kind of feed back to you about what you're doing until you've done it. The whole dream of build it and they will come is that I will build it first, then I'll find out. And that's that psychological and mental problem completely enshrined within our money system. And the book proposes an economic mechanism that I call emergent economics that allows you to go through nature as bringing nature as becoming a sovereign agent in that system. And it allows you to exchange your money into nature's money. And it turns nature's money that comes out is entirely emergent. And it changes that economic side. And to do it requires a lot of conversations, because this is so entrenched. And the conversations is not the mechanism. It's like scientists saying the mechanisms are there. It's the conversations which are lacking. And conversations doesn't mean agreement. It means conversations. It means social connections. And people misunderstand it to say, oh, it means we must agree. No, that's not actually how you develop that emergent economics. It doesn't come from agreement. It comes from interaction.
Do you think our systems are no longer serving us It doesn't,
absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, especially of a young person.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
I think you basically you have driven the current system so far. It's no longer fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And the real discussion we need to be having is how do you replace it? Because there are parts by replacing it which are not particularly pleasant. And history teaches us that that's normally what happens when enough people feel that, what, ain't working for me. And that's really the discussion we should be having.
So,
all right, so just a sec. I know Monica hasn't got much time, and we've kind of gone over. But I want to. So you're really looking this in the eye. I was with some friends last night, and they said, "Oh God, it's really depressing talking to you about this stuff." And I'm like, because it isn't a happy story, right? And there's nothing I can do to change it. But there are. But I am one of those people that believes that we can do something, but we're not doing. We're tinkering around the edges, right? So you're at the face of it. You're hearing it, seeing it all. Especially you've got that unique perspective from Brazil, right? So can you give us some thoughts to leave us with? Because I mean, it must be it's a burden to carry this knowledge, right? And then to exist in the world as a normal human being when you see all around you, what's going on. But yeah, how do you deal with it, and how do you cope with it?
Well, it's incredibly hard. I don't sleep, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get to sleep much. And I think this is not good. I think we have to find, a balance on how we react to data. But it's incredibly important that everyone has enough data to make decisions, because, good decisions, because if you don't have that data, the majority of population, if they don't have this data, they can't make decisions, good decisions. So, I really, really, really worry. And honestly, I worry that despite everyone nodding and taking notes, for instance, at the briefing, nothing will change at the top, because we've seen this before, okay? Promises made and then, forgotten. I could see all the MPs sitting at the front rows and nodding and, yes, I could see that they were agreeing to it. But from agreeing to the point of making changes, it's a long, long way. This is really concerns me. But at the same time, we can't wait for top-down changes, anymore. We can't wait anymore. Action needs to come from everywhere and fast. And because if we don't make changes willingly now, we will be forced into them later. And it will be incredibly painful for everyone, and especially to the most vulnerable in society. They will be hit first and hardest. And we must think of others collectively. We can't just think of ourselves. And this is it. At the end of the briefing, a question, I would like to add this. At the end of the briefing, a question popped up. And they asked us who thought things were even worse than what was presented at the briefing. I raised my hand instantly. And do you know why? Because the human suffering and the destruction of wildlife behind all these numbers, it's impossible to measure. We can't measure that, okay? And we do need drastic changes. We do. To the way we live today. So our global systems, as we've discussed here, no longer serve us, and they will eventually collapse. They will. We need to, like a restart button. This will be at a huge cost for everyone. Something humanity is not prepared to pay for. Look, are you prepared to give up half of your assets? Are you? I mean, I am, but most people aren't.
Absolutely. I would be if we got an explicit promise that we fix climate change, it's very cheap to give up half your assets.
Yes.
Very cheap.
Yes.
Actually, I mean, I think Richard and I wrote this paper. I put the link there. And the difference between the approach we took, we well, how much is our portfolio worth, our pension worth, basically, and we took a different approach. We took approach closer to what Matthew pointed out in the comments. We asked, what are the chances of bankruptcy for a major company like Nestle, basically? And we put it as something like, maybe 0.25% a year, as it were, and increases by a little bit every year if it just carries on and we do nothing about climate change in that sense. But the essence of it that makes it really different is even if we do something about it from this point on, that likelihood doesn't suddenly disappear. It just more or less stays around that level because climate change still continues. The disruption still continues, and people don't appreciate that. They think you fix it and it's all sunny and everything's fine. We came out as 50% is what what it's worth, basically. So that giving up 50%, you've already given it up. You just haven't realized it yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point.
Yes.
And by the way, I'd love to know your thoughts on my book, as it were, because central to what you say, we have to have that ability for our money and the investments we make and the things we buy to be able to connect with that. Otherwise, we get swamped again by the whole setup. Yes. And what it does is it offers a mechanism that can allow us to do that. It's entirely emergent, which means it doesn't rely at all on governments in that way. And it brings governments in. So it's not like you do everything without governments, because then that's kind of like the anarchy everybody fears in that way. So it's not that at all. And it's incremental. And the essence of it is we don't get this overnight. It has to come from that awareness. But the thing about nature, if you ever see nature grow along, is you sort of stare at it, nothing happens. You come back a week later and think, my God, what's happened here? The weeds have gone wild.
Especially in the tropics.
Yeah.
It's incredible watching how fast things grow. All right, so mindful of your time, Monica. Yes. I know you got 3 articles to write today. Is that right?
No, but I do a lot of research on the side, for my articles. So it's a long process. Yes, yeah. Some of the articles I do extensive research. Yes, I just wanted to add one more thing. If things don't change, I really don't know what kind of future our children will have. Okay, and this is what it should be on everyone's minds. I know it's a cliche, but it's what kind of world are we living for them, and also the enormous amount of pain we're inflicting in societies across the globe already. Okay, in the most vulnerable ones, we have to think of them too, and we're not. We're becoming desensitized to the way we look at things. We look at a disaster. Oh, only 100 died. Oh, do you know what I mean? This is one life is important. Never mind, 100, 200, every life is important. And we should really, really start, not become so desensitized about things. And this is where the danger lies.
Yeah, I'm with you. We're on the front lines, you see it versus wealthy Western nations. You're not necessarily as exposed, right? So in Thailand, it was awful, some of the stuff that we saw, and just knowing the impact of these floods that have had right across the region. Some of the stories out of Sri Lanka, entire families just wiped away, and the devastation of the remaining family member. It's just it just breaks your heart. So, and that's why empathy is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you
to all of you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.
Hopefully I'll see you on Saturday night in the chat.
Bye.
All right. Bye. Bye. All right. There we go. The lovely Monica.
Yeah.
So, sort of, it was funny. I was thinking of a title for a blog called The Unbearable Burden of Knowing. One of my favorite books of all time was The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It's like, it's hard because I know, Joe, you listen to this story through our eyes, really, in a lot of ways, but it's hard, to know what we know and to see what we see coming, and then to function out there in the world as a, a fully formed human being, especially when you look at your kids, right? There's a real burden with it. And like this person I was saying last night said to me, I just find it so depressing. And I'm like, but you're a parent. Like, this is something that's going to impact your kids. So shouldn't the parents take that burden on so their kids can just be kids? Like, that was what I did with my boys. I talked to them gently about what was going on in the world until they got old enough to know for themselves. Because I wanted them to, and when they were small, and they said, "Oh, we're gonna all die from climate change," I said, "Don't you worry about that. I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen. You go and enjoy your childhood." And then it was, I don't know, 6 months ago when my eldest said, "Mum, you're not succeeding. Where climate change is going to come." And I always knew that day was coming, right? It broke my heart, but I'm glad that I gave them the confidence for that length of time where they could just enjoy their childhood,
But how do they feel about Santa Claus? I mean, how's that going?
Yeah, they were late believers in that too. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, so we obviously convinced them somehow, but I mean, it's hard. It's hard, and for someone like Monica who's doing the work that she's doing, it's a big burden, right?
Yes, and with grown-up children, I most certainly I feel the culpability that they are attaching to our generation very strongly, and they're not doing it in a personal way, but they are fairly explicit in terms of how badly they think we mess this up.
Yeah, I think that anger is going to really grow too. I think that's another thing.
And that frightens me most definitely, because angry young people, probably more than any other group, will not listen to rational arguments. And if you lose that ability to impose rationality to actions, then it's going to get messy.
Yeah. One of my fears is I think more people are paying attention to this than have ever paid attention to it, because it's becoming undeniable, right? Yeah. My greatest fear is a world sinking into mass despair, and because we did that a long time ago, right? When we kind of were putting all the pieces together, and had to. I mean, for me personally, I had to navigate that territory myself without trying to be too much of a burden on the people around me. I didn't like being social, because I was dealing with the deepest grief I've ever known. Steve was very patient going through that with me, but I think at some point that's going to happen, and all I say to people is, don't sink into the despair. Don't even sink into the understanding what we're in. Just start acting. Just start doing something. Just get moving. Let's move forward as quickly as we can. Come together. It's got to be community, or we're going to have this extremist authoritarianism, fascism, all that sort of stuff, which is going to make everything worse. So we've just got to come together and move forward together and get that global agreement. Otherwise, I'm extremely concerned about this phase that we're already in, but it getting exponentially worse.
I want to bring out, I've been reading my book with my mum. My mum is 90. You find it in YouTube. Connect me. I could share a link along in that way. And, the way we brought up one thing along, and she says, you have to be able to have that faith in the future. And for her, she was asking, does this mean a faith in God? And I was saying, well, it depends on different people. They have the faith in different things. But ultimately, you need that faith in some way to know that you have a purpose. And that's what takes you on through. And that's really important in that way. So the reality, and what we said before about the acceptance of the reality, is to say that, don't wait for it to be better before you feel you can act. Don't wait for that permission to say, now is ready for you to go and do your thing. You is where you are, but how you know that is that sense within you. The fact that you're in despair is the other side of the coin to saying, actually, I feel something of what I am, that I have a purpose, that there is a purpose along. And this part that you say about the connection and so on, is this part where there's this section I put in as a quote from my book a little while back, is to get it to work, it needs to meet with our self-interest. But the thing to remember and to realize is that in order to thrive, our self-interest is to thrive, and we need others to thrive.
Mm.
You can be isolated and then you get depressed and all the rest of it, and you can survive, but you're not thriving in that way. So that self-interest to thrive is a self-interest to look after others. And that's really kind of a very important pivoting, because that allows you to get into action, to get into that sense of purpose you have, to start thinking, what does looking after others mean so that they can actually benefit me as well? Because it is that in that way, because I can't keep giving my money into charity because I've run out of money in that sense. So you need to make that economic connection. And the part that's important, the title in the book, Nature's Pace, is that it emerges. It comes out, it's like play. The game get richer and you enjoy it more because it emerges, because there's the interaction that comes along. If you prescribe it, then typically, the other kid goes along and says, well, I'm not playing with you anymore. At least that's what happened to me. But other kids are better at allowing to emerge in that way.
I'm looking forward to getting into the book to sort of really sort of understand what you're saying right now, Richard, David. But it's not landing. But I think once I read the book, it will. Joe, any final thoughts, and we'll get on to the news that we're not going to talk about?
No, let's move it along. I think let's keep going. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so it's that time of the year when we're going to get the annual wrap ups, and one of my favorite things that happen at the end of every year is the word of the year. So, have you guys heard any of them yet?
No, I'm blissfully unaware.
All right. So for Oxford, it's rage bait. Macquarie Dictionary, AI slop. Cambridge Dictionary is parasocial, and in case you don't know what that means, it basically describes the one-sided relationships we form with creators, celebrities, and influencers. Okay. Collins Dictionary is vibe coding, and if you don't know this, your Gen Z children probably do. So this is the act of signaling your mood or your vibe, and you can do it through things like how you're dressed, the playlist that you're listening to, or just how you arrange your space. So it's a way of not saying it directly. And the final one is dictionary.com's, and their word of the year is 67.
No, it's 67. It's not 67.
Oh, well, sorry. So I'm obviously not. I'm not a Gen Alpha. I don't even have Gen Alphas in the house. Yeah.
And you have to do it this way as well. It's 67. There's a whole. It's a thing. It means nothing.
Yes, it literally means nothing. It was It's a signal that some influencers started on YouTube, and it's sort of taken off. Yeah. But anyway, thanks, Joe, for the correction. All right, so Pantone has named its color of the
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Pantone has named its color of the year for 2026, and it's settled on a shade of white, which it's called Cloud Dancer, and it's described the shade as a billowy, balanced white imbued with a feeling of serenity. So there you go. When I looked at it, it just looks like white. Anyway, in other news, the New York Times is suing the Pentagon, saying the rules imposed by Pete Hegseth, who we're going to talk about a little bit later if we get time, violate the US Constitution's First Amendment freedom of speech guarantees, as well as its due process provisions. Japan's exceptionally rare snow monsters, so these are these trees that get covered in snow based on very unique conditions. They're falling victim to climate change. Ireland, Spain, the Netherlands, and Slovenia, and there's a couple more countries who haven't decided yet, will boycott the 2026 Eurovision Song Contest after Israel was allowed to compete, although the actual thing that they voted for was not Israel's participation. It was something else. The European Parliament I mentioned earlier has agreed to dilute and postpone EU deforestation rules, and based on the conversation we've been having, such a win. Elon Musk, you might be surprised, is a white supremacist racist pig. And sorry, oh, did I say that out loud? I thought I just thought it. But there's another arsehole in the mix, and his name is Alex Karp. He's the CEO of Palantir, along with his mate Peter Thiel. And he says making war crimes constitutional would be good for business. Seriously, if you have an opportunity to listen to this guy, do. He's all about war, and the way he speaks, I was around those sort of people in the tech industry for a long time. There's a confidence in the way they speak because nobody ever speaks back, So interesting. All right, there's. I mean, seriously, when I was going through the news that we won't be talking about, there was a lot, and that's just a flavour.
I'd like to add one onto that, if I may. And that's the renaming of the American Institute of Peace to Donald Trump Institute of Peace.
Yeah. So Matthew, I'm not keeping up with your comments in relation to what you're saying. That's because you were saying so that's obviously the 6-7 comment. But anyway, yeah. Okay, Ollie said I mentioned 6-7. Well, I didn't. I said 67. It was correct at exactly 67 minutes from the start. So there you go. No plan. All right. Yeah, the Institute of Peace. Okay. This time last week we were talking about the catastrophic floods that were happening across Asia, and a lot of people didn't really even know that it was going on. Right. Just counter speaking back.
Scary, but factually correct. It was a minuscule 3-second here on television.
Yeah, but this week it's been different, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Well, I think what's happening is that people who booked holidays in those areas are now realizing that the holiday plans are kind of a bit spoiled, and they're worrying about their Christmas breaks, and so it's hitting the news over here in the sense of actually the implications to yourself. And that's kind of good because it allows you to realize actually climate change is something that's happening now. It's not 2100. I hate the scientists for constantly talking about what the sea level will be in 2100.
Yeah.
We're not going to be there if you keep talking about it in that way.
Steady, I'm younger than you. No.
Yeah, but the dengue fever is going to get you along the way.
As much.
But I'll give you a few numbers. So the total damages estimated so far at 4 billion, and that's across Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and other countries in the region, and obviously the Philippines has been hammered as well. Yep. In Indonesia, all eyes are on deforestation, as it should be. It issued 2,000 licenses this year, and this is for things like a lot of it's for mining, so for gold, but it's also for palm oil plantations. And I've talked about this before. This is one of the most horrific things you've seen, right? Here's the problem, right? And so there's an anger in Indonesian society that's growing because of this. But will Indonesian society also be willing to sacrifice the economic benefits? So a lot of the people that were impacted by these floods would also work in these industries, which resulted. So if they didn't have the industries, they wouldn't have the jobs. So that common argument that keeps happening, right? And in poorer nations, this is an important point, and people often forget it. But the forestry ministry in Indonesia has said. The pendulum between the economy and ecology seems to have swung too far towards the economy and needs to be pulled back to the center. Now, I don't agree with pulling back to the center because the deforestation is so massive that they actually need to pull back way towards the ecology if they've got any chance. But I'm glad that this is coming up. But deforestation in this region is just. It's off the charts, and people are paying for that with their lives. Right? Some of the landslides, right? It was horrible. David,
I like to put that, that amount, 4 billion you mentioned, into the context of what it means if it was the global kind of GDP, as it were. You scale it back into that, it's like 14, 15 trillion. So, and this can happen anywhere, so it can happen everywhere. In that way. So, sometimes these numbers get a little bit kind of lost along the way because, we used to sort of big numbers along the way, and we only see it locally. And, Vietnam is a comparatively small place in terms of the global economy. As you look on the big kind of China, US, and kind of Europe, it's kind of a little bit there. Yeah. But the reality is the rippling on, and the fact that while that happens, you can have a incredibly intense snowstorm in the US coming from the polar vortex dragging down over that period, and you can have a massive kind of cyclone somewhere over in Australia that's disrupting all of your iron ships carrying your iron ores and all the rest of it, and they can all be happening together, and that's what we're moving on to. In that way, is the coalescing of all these different things happening at more or less a similar sort of time that really compounds. And what makes it worse on top of that is you're going to be worried about your holiday and the fact that you can't go there. And that's when it kind of really hits you, because your coffee has just gone up. I think I said last time it was £4.40 for a coffee in the high street in London. For a cup of that, about $5-6 for a cup of coffee in that way. And that's going to be 10.
£4 sounds cheap.
Yeah.
That's inflation for you. You adapt. But fear not. We have no inflation. That's what the
but your wages
politicians keep saying.
But the gap to your wages is going to keep increasing.
Yeah.
Especially if you are not one of the Peter Thiel people.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Richard, you want to jump in?
No, I think this is very nicely summed up. It's going to erode your ability to keep living the life you like and have been doing. Simple as.
Yeah.
You will get hurt. You will get hurt financially, and eventually you will get hurt physically. But first, you'll get hurt financially.
Yeah.
I think really Nature's PR team needs to work a little bit harder in terms of timing things, because I was thinking about how these things that David's been talking about, the holidays. If all this had happened a month and a half later, when everyone was on holiday in all these places, we'd get the kind of and this is going to sound terrible and very opportunistic of me to speak of it this way, but it's going to be like the tsunamis. The Christmas Day tsunami. It's because it happened then that it had so many connections with everybody else. It's just like why 911 was so impactful in the US, because it was such a center connection that had everyone. Like so many people had someone they knew, who was somehow affected in that way. So the same way like this as well. It doesn't affect the West as much to say I have to change my plans than to actually have
been stranded.
1,000 Instagram influencers being in the middle of the worst devastation ever, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be something.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I like the idea
of like a true terrorist.
Yeah, I like the idea of 1,000 influencers being stranded in the middle of devastation. Sorry.
Tell us what you really think, Andrea.
So obnoxious. Especially, it's really obnoxious in Asia because there's no respect for anyone, right? So in Europe, they've really gotten it under control, and they've tried to. And I remember doing a selfie with a friend of mine in Holland, and the Dutch people around me were just taking the piss out of me constantly. And I was like, I'm just catching up with a friend and we're just taking a photo. Like we weren't being, I didn't think we were being obnoxious, but in Asia, it's a really different story. They're everywhere. There's no peace. There's no escape. You sit at a cafe and every angle is some girl in a bikini in the ocean, sort of like, oh, look at me, and it's like, I just look at it and go, have you no shame?
Well, it's why I've stopped doing the bikini thing myself, actually. So
yeah. No, that's a good thing, Joe. Okay, so another big thing that's happening is Australia is cancelling social media for people 16 and under, or up to 16. And I just wanted to, because obviously the coverage is focusing on lots of different angles to this, but I just wanted to see, what did you guys think of that?
I find it really, really interesting because it connects for me in many, many ways to a broader societal debate about adulthood, right? Which is one of my pet cases. So we want to protect children. I think that's the universal starting point. And we think that exposing them to certain content is harmful, and we arbitrarily grab the age of 16. 16-year-olds got to vote in the referendum about Scotland independence, I believe, right? That was the age that was set. We are basically going into the candy shop with a pick and mix mentality. Sometimes we want this, and then we want that. And when you hear the debate, it's always very well-meaning by saying, oh, we shouldn't expose children to that, and we need to protect our children. And then on the other hand, oh, children should have all these rights, and they should be able to do A, B, C, D. It's like, you can't have it all, guys. You need to come to a point of reason where you cannot have it all. But we're living in a society effectively which endorses the idea that we can only pick and mix the bits we want for each and every one without actually having to pay for the overall consequences of those decisions. And to me, it's like, it's fine. I think it's a very reasonable approach. They are children. Children do not have certain rights. Parents get to decide over them. But we also, as a society, in a broader context, need to get to a point where you can no longer just pick and choose for children the bits that we think make sense. I hope I've made myself clear, right?
I'm not clear what side you're on then.
No, I'm not on either side here, because I see powerful arguments for both sides.
Okay.
Oh, your French roots are showing there.
Should you allow your kids to watch the news in the evening? I mean, it's one of the most horrific programs shown on television at times, right?
Yeah.
We need to find somehow here to actually stop telling people that we can do whatever we want at all times, because life doesn't work like that.
Well, I think
David has a daughter in the age group, so I suppose
I think there's a difference here, because that difference is about developmental psychology. And the essence of what's being addressed is that the ability for the algorithms to manipulate that psychology. Yeah. So back to the old book, The Unsustainable Job, right? And as we're writing that, we were talking this part about those things that advertisers attach to, those things of data's emotions, our emotional self, which is how you market something. You don't market it on the functionality of what something is. You market it on the basis of attaching it to our emotions in that way. And those parts of that psychology is being manipulated along, and it's actually is changing. And there are kind of increasing evidence that it changes the developmental psychology of people, especially in the ages where they're developing relationships.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. Is not so much they need to learn how to deal with these things. Is that actually the environment of learning itself is the corruption.
Yeah.
And it leaves them in a situation of being unable to do the distinction that you're talking about, that Richard is talking about.
Yeah, I am. I'm with you, David. So the psychology story is to me the really big one, and the harm it's doing.
And it wires the brain.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's an addiction as well, early addiction. And obviously these companies are making a lot of money from these kids, right? And and so for me, it's they didn't do what they needed to do to address the concerns and the impact it was having on kids, which included depression, anxiety, and teen suicides. So they didn't do what they had to do to address it. So Australia's saying enough. So just to give some stats, right? So there was an article in Times a couple of weeks ago, the allegations against Meta in newly unleashed court filings. So sex trafficking and child safety reporting. It's a 17 times strike policy. So basically, you can post sexual trafficking, child safety. You could do the wrong thing. What's the word I'm trying to? I've gone blank. 16 times before you're suspended. Right? There's basically no reporting mechanism for this. And one of the numbers was 5.4 million unwanted interactions happen daily between adult strangers and minors, like daily, right? So they were looking at doing things like having private accounts for children. And then Meta decided not to do that because it basically cost the company too much money, and they couldn't financially benefit from the child.
No, they couldn't monetize that part of the business.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So they concealed this research from 2019, which showed kids, when they get off social media, have reduced anxiety and depression within a week or two, and that they basically denied it in Congress that this was true, and have been compared to how tobacco companies also hid their own research. It's all about growth over safety, and there's former employees who quit. They're also targeting under 13-year-olds. So there are millions of platforms. So in 2015, there were 4 million. Today, God knows how many it is. 40% were 9 to 12 years old. So what David was saying about the psychological impact. So yeah, I mean, it's addictive by design. They know it. Meta knows it. They've hidden the research. It's doing great harm to our children. And I know that there's a lot of kids, especially who are unhappy about this. And, and I really feel for them, because this is the generation that have been in it, and now it's going to be taken away from them. And it's already started. The 10th of December is when the deadline. So they've already started taking these accounts off these kids. There's some young influencer kids that are sort of saying, they're losing a revenue stream. I struggle with the concept of anyone that age being an influencer anyway. Just I just think just from a safety perspective, especially young girls. So I don't know. I just think the social media companies didn't do what they needed to do, and this is the outcome, and it's going to be expanded. Other countries are looking at Australia, and they're going to follow lead. And just economically, what's that going to look like for Meta, right? I mean, they've already got their fraud accounts. That'd be massive, right?
But also, I think, and this is another pet hate of mine, right? If you look at something and it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it probably is a duck, is the conclusion.
But you have to be concerned with duck stocking.
I have to be concerned about that. But I would err on the side of believing that it's a talking duck.
It might just be you.
Yeah.
It might just be me. So, for all intent and purposes, we look at a company like Uber. Uber is effectively a cab service, taxi service, but it circumvents regulation by saying that it's, sharing cars, right? You circumvent the regulation that way. If you're a newspaper, or, like we spoke about BBC 2 weeks ago, you have a responsible editor, a publisher that actually carries the can if you put certain content out there that turns out to be false or, defamatory, etc., etc. And somehow in society, we have accepted that social media platforms, that is no longer the case, right? You can put pretty much whatever content out there and it has no consequences for the publisher, because it's not me. and that regulation somehow is designed to protect them from saying it's not me. The simplest thing you could do in all this is just to return to basic, long-standing practical legislation. If I'm putting something out there that turns out to be false, damaging, defamatory, I'm going to be responsible. I mean, it's not hard when you think about it that way.
No, but
Yeah,
but
I think
the right-wing extremists are fighting that one, right?
I think,
right?
I think the part where this all kind of collapses is this whole concept in terms of what constitutes cause, in a way. The whole causality problem, if a bullet ball hits another one, does it move because it got hit by the bullet ball? The whole causality issue or it's just coincidental that it happened in that way. And a lot of these things are very nuanced in terms of the cause. And the more we develop this sort of reductionist scientific approach to it, the more we end up kind of saying, well, the proof isn't quite there. In other words, the proof is only proven when you're dead, which is actually not very useful. But the evidence law increasingly leans towards that, which is why it fails, which is why people talk about the storms that have flooded the Asian countries as we talk. And they say, well, there may be just 10% attributable to climate change. Sounds tiny. The mosquito in Iceland, there are plenty of people who says it could just be more ships coming by, more cruise ships in those ways. And there are all kinds of nuances along. There are more cruise ships going to Iceland because Iceland is a little bit warmer, is a more favorable environment for people to go and travel to, which is also related to climate change. But the link is not made in that way, because in this web of connections along, what happens is you refuse to accept that when one branch of this sort of web wobbles along, the whole web wobbles along. You have to say, well, the fly has to fall exactly on that bit for it to count. And that's where this thing about, what's causing it and so on becomes accountability becomes lost, because you hide behind all these layers to say, not actually accountable for it.
Yeah. Which, to me, doesn't really hold true when you scrutinize the facts behind it. You are offering a publishing service. You should be responsible and liable for what is being put out there. And that would force you to take action in ways which is much, much more effective than any legislation could.
Yeah. And let's not forget, of course, these very same companies are the ones that own the AI tools that these kids are still are going to be using more and more. So, I've navigated my boys through their teenage years on social media, but because I'm so active on social media, first of all, I'm aware of what's going on. I'm aware of who's out there. I'm aware of the challenges and the problems. So I've been able to have discussions with them. But the vast majority of parents, because the social media companies are trying to put the burden on the parents, right? They just they cannot do that. They don't have the time. A single mum working 3 jobs to keep her kids, fed and housed. She hasn't got time to sit down and make sure they're not talking to creeps. No. So something's got to give. I hope this is a success. I hope it sees some change, because social media has been. I mean, we know it's basically destroyed the global democracies. It's become. I'm still on X. It's fascinating seeing what's gone on over there. But I'm there for a specific reason. But it's that's Elon Musk is tweeting extremist, racist content this week. That's why I referenced him in the news we're not going to talk about. But one of the headlines that got my attention this week that I haven't really sort of been able to get my head around and spend time on is something's going on in Japan. So, it's headlines: disturbing Japan move has the world on edge. Markets prepare for chaos and turmoil as Japan sees dramatic bond yield movement. So, because you guys know this stuff and pay attention, who would like to talk about it? What's going on?
Well, Japan has been, and I'm an old guy, has been stuck in basically a low to zero rate environment for all my working life. More so than any other country, rates in Japan have been extremely low. Their stock market peaked, at the time the Berlin Wall came down, which is quite a long time ago. And after that, as the property bubble unraveled, Japanese economy experienced very, very slow, sluggish growth for more than 2 decades. And rates were commensurately cut to very low levels, trying to stimulate that growth. And it became, the long-standing joke that effectively Japanese bond markets and Japanese rates never moved. They were just pegged at extraordinarily low levels. The stock market and the property market has recovered, particularly since COVID. And actually, after 35 years, the stock index made a new high this year. So on some measures, the Japanese recovery has taken place with respect to assets. Property prices, inflation adjusted, are not quite back to where they were in the bubble years, but you're certainly a lot higher than you were, and stock market has recovered, and Japan has many very, very successful companies around the world in many, many industries. So it's not surprising. They have champions in many industries that are doing very well. However, Bank of Japan, who sets the short-term interest rate, has been extraordinarily reluctant to actually raise rates despite improving economic conditions. And rates are still, minuscule in the front end. It's 50 basis points, 0.5%. Which means that as the market participants see these economic improvements and the recovery in asset prices, long-dated yields have risen very sharply because they actually conclude that at some point Bank of Japan needs to start raising rates much more aggressively, because actually Japan is doing quite well. They have been dragging their feet, partially perhaps for political reasons. They have a meeting later this month when it's widely expected that they will have to raise rates. I personally think they will. I think at this point there's no reason why they shouldn't. But we are witnessing levels on 10-year, 20-year, 30-year bonds in Japan that we have never seen in the lifetime of any of us. And because, now I'm going to get a bit technical, because the yield curve, as we call it, starting at the very front end where you have overnight money going all the way out to the 40-year bond, which is the longest bond Japan has issued, is very, 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 very steep. The rate you can calculate in the forward space is extraordinarily steep. Japan has the highest rate expectations anywhere in the Western world 20 years from now, which seems crazy when short rates are zero. And that has now started affecting things quite a lot. And turnover, trading volumes have been higher than at any point in history for these kind of instruments. Because actually now, for the first time in my working life, Japanese interest rates are moving a lot. And it's having repercussions with terms of pricing for a lot of other things. And when you have a currency that also looks very cheap on a historical basis, there are many moving parts in this equation that can really start unraveling. So in the global context of financial markets, there is a lot more focus on Japan than we have had for decades.
Mm.
And it's getting very volatile.
Mm. And the valuation of those bonds 40 years out, I mean, that doesn't make any sense based on everything else we talk about, right?
I think the problem is this: governments own debt, and they do so by borrowing constantly. Government borrows from the pensions and the savings institutes. That's kind of how they borrow from. They may be domestic ones or foreign ones. If you're a developing country, you tend to borrow from other countries, other sovereigns in that way. Increasingly kind of in multilateral banks and have come into that role in that sense. But for developed countries like Japan, US, and sort of Germany and all of those things, this tends to be like borrowing from effectively a payday lender, basically. So you keep having to roll it over. And you roll it over every week, every month in that way. The bulk of your debt is not a very long-term one. It's actually very short-term that you have to keep rolling up. And it comes very short-term because the long-term ones gradually come down. So each country borrows, say, 10 years. In 10 years' time, it comes down and then borrows out and carries on in that way. And that's a huge chunk that is borrowed over the 1 year and 2 year period as well, along with that. So if Japan's interest rate goes up in this sense, then when it comes to rolling over the next time, the lenders are actually asking for more interest to compensate. They want that. Japan has about 250% of GDP in terms of its debt that it needs to roll over. So the GDP is the overall amount of money that is transacted, both earned and used and all the rest counted in that way. So it needs to roll over, and I don't know what is revenue as a percentage of GDP. It's probably half or something. In that sense. So it needs to roll over a huge amount at a high interest rate. So the borrowing debt, the kindly financial institutions are going to turn into loan sharks. The reason they're going to turn into loan sharks is because it's thinking, now that Japan has kind of recovered, per se, in that sort of quotey way, it really needs to pay up. But it's got so much debt, it's not going to. So I'm going to have to charge a huge interest rate because this guy's not going to pay up in that way. And I already have a huge amount exposed to them. I don't really want them to borrow, to lend more to them in this kind of world. So it may well be the first major government, is the third largest country in terms of its GDP, to go bankrupt. Wow. That's the implications of what it does. And it goes bankrupt because it has recovered, as Richard's describing. Not because it hasn't recovered, but because the recovery itself is the trigger that exposes all the cracks.
Mm-hmm. So what's the sort of time frame that's going on here, and what are the ripple effects? I mean, that just sounds crazy.
It's very, very hard to tell the time frame we're operating under. But like David describes, the risk premia that the people that are lending to Japan Incorporated are attaching is rising. That's why these long-dated bonds are carrying such a high yield compared to the short end. Now, Japan on some levels actually are better off than many other Western societies because although they carry far more debt than anyone else, about 250% to GDP, and if we compare that to highly indebted countries in Europe, like Italy is about 140%, the UK is about 100%, US is basically around 100%. They have about 2.5 times to double those countries. Contrary to particularly the US and the UK, Japan also has an asset side that is very, very valuable. State of Japan, the country itself, owns its railways, owns its healthcare system, owns lots of deep infrastructure. That before you go into the bankruptcy moment, which I think is highly likely that we will get a call on Western governments' uncontrolled spending, Japan can probably do some things that other countries cannot do. I mean, let's face it, the UK has sold off all their assets they ever had.
I don't think that's true. I think that's trying to view the asset as a fixed asset and not as the income stream, because inflation is picking up.
Yes, and
the people can't actually afford the travel. So your railways and all of those assets work because essentially Japan, the misunderstood thing about Japan is that in the decades when it had very low interest rate and it was supposed to be the lost decades and so on, it thrived.
Yes.
Its GDP per capita matched other places. Its economic complexity massively increased. It wound up all of its cross holdings and it became much, much more able. And its aging population became actually an entrepreneurial population as over that period. And that was because the interest rates were very low people didn't have that asset inflation. That really helped it. And it meant that actually it became very resourceful in many ways. And then over the past probably decade, 5 years, 5 years before COVID, the sort of definitely since COVID, since Abe kind of second term and stuff, it got into his head it has to become like an American nation. And so it really pushed for that kind of acceleration of its assets, asset inflation. And the consequence of that asset inflation in a community that is very old, it's one of the oldest populations in the world, extremely low birth rate, very kind of internally focused, very little immigration in that way. Export focused in a world that is localizing rather than globalizing in many aspects. It's a complete disaster. It will see its social structure seriously impacted because of the policy of trying to be like America.
All right.
Yeah,
so
Japan is incredibly ill-suited to inflation, while countries like the UK and the US desperately needs it because of the private levels of indebtedness. Japan is really, really ill-suited to handle inflation, and that's what they're having now. And that could have catastrophic societal consequences because they're not equipped to deal with it or actually thrive under inflation. It's the opposite. Japan does really well when there is no inflation.
All right, Joe, unless you want to jump in or move on.
I mean, for me, I'm just looking at the charts as you're speaking about this, having a look at what currencies are doing, trying to figure out if there's a panic in the market yet. I see it slowly moving. I don't know.
It's a one-way direction of travel.
I think this might be a story that we keep that we come back to again.
Absolutely, because I think it's ongoing. Absolutely.
So Mark Carney is obviously the Prime Minister of Canada, and he's known for his very, very strong views on the climate. As the what was he, the head of the Bank of England and the head of the Bank of Canada? In both roles, he was very serious about talking about the climate. And so when I see prime ministers like him getting sort of criticized in the media for the decisions he's making from a climate perspective, it's kind of like you kind of listen to it and you're like it's like I don't think there's a more impossible job than being a leader of a country in these days than there is. But there was an interesting piece in Canada's National Observer, which is the method to Mark Carney's madness. So basically, the criticism that sort of emerged in the recent week was he'd made a grand bargain with Alberta. So basically, he offered the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, a pipeline deal. So a memorandum of understanding was signed that she wanted. And basically, what they're saying is he signed this MOU based on the fact it's never going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is it's going to get massive opposition from the First Nations peoples. The BC Premier, David Elby, will fight it. Oil and gas industry won't invest in high-cost projects due to basically peak oil demands and shareholder obligations. So that's basically why it won't happen. So Carney's real win, by getting her to agree to the climate. He got her to agree to climate concessions in exchange for signing this pipeline promise. The pipeline won't happen, and he got what he wants. So, I thought that was a really good take. So, just anytime you're paying attention to the media and climate leadership in this world that we're living in right now, it's a really hard job. It's a really hard job. Yeah, and not as all as it appears.
No. I've said no many times.
I think this is like the story of kind of, Pontius Pilate washing his hands kind of thing, right? And saying, the other guys it's not going to happen. They're not going to hang him. They're not going to build this pipeline. Come on, I'm offering them something much obvious. They'll be rational. They'll do the right thing. Carney has actually been quite direct in promoting Alberta oil and Canadian oil.
But he'd lose the country if he didn't, right?
Well, I think he did that also to try and win the premiership as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's not true that he'd lose the country if he didn't. I don't necessarily know what happens in that way. There is a dependency the Canadians have in terms of the oil trade with the US. Most of it goes to the US in that way, and it has been structured in that way. So in some sense, this is part of his kind of deal with Trump, to say with Donald Trump, to say, you know, we'll keep the tariffs down because this is what it is. It's actually two-way. The US needs that oil as well, in that sense, and oil flows through pipelines, and you can't really divert it to somewhere else easily in that quick way. But his whole kind of approach towards climate has changed from when he was talking about the financial task force on financial climate disclosures that he spearheaded. It has definitely completely changed. He is advocate for oil and gas, without any doubt in my mind. In his current role, he is a strong advocate for the oil and gas industry and the use of oil and gas. In every opportunity, he talks about it in that way. I have not heard one thing from him since his premiership where he raises climate as an issue.
Right. Okay. And I mean, there's so much going on in Canada from an economics perspective, right? Aluminium smelters exploding, the automotive industry. I mean, there's so much going on over there, right?
Yes, everything. I mean, you know, in some sense, he's taking on something where he has to give up on something to do that, and what is given up on is kind of the idea of that role in the climate world.
Yeah. All right. So, anyone else want to got anything to say on Canada?
I'm just wondering whether or not
fine ice hockey players over the years. I will say that.
Yeah, definitely. Joe?
No, I was thinking about how, and I'm maybe speaking out of turn here, but I was thinking that I think in Canada, in terms of the what's happening on the ground, I get the sense that they're actually more inclined towards the environment naturally, and there's a bit more balance there as well. So I think in terms of having to get people to come along and do something, do the right thing, right? I think you know, the leader's got to choose the right flag to fly at the time. It's not like it's no longer a thing, but there's a, I mean, like, there's a whole thing about, it's the whole reason why there's a Canadian flavor to things, right? You can, I don't know if this is a fair thing to say, and if there's any truth at all to it, but is the Canadian oil business better than the oil business elsewhere in terms of what it does? I don't know.
It's one of the worst. It's one of the worst.
Oh, okay.
Environmentally,
it's extremely heavy. It doesn't.
Okay, then all we have is hockey. Then all we have is hockey. Sorry about that.
No,
all
but
right,
I do think Joe is correct that Canadian people share some traits very much with Scandinavian people. You know, they're a bit northerly. They have access to great forests, where there is a better understanding of those things than it is for your average Western citizen. That I definitely do believe, because they share some of those very philosophical beliefs about how you go about living. However, the Canadian oil industry is a very different story, because it's, you know, like Venezuela, it's really crappy stuff. That's not the high grade things you really want to take out of the ground. That's the first thing you should leave in there.
Right. Right. Interesting. All right. I want to just quickly mention, so it was reported this week that extreme weather is making plastic pollution worse. So basically, extreme heat, it breaks up the plastics even more and makes them more persistent and hazardous, and they're releasing more chemicals. So, yay, let's get a plastics treaty. But there's a piece in the Daily Mail, and it's super funds plunge billions into fossil fuel companies. And this is something we've talked about a lot, and it was mentioned a little bit earlier as well. But Australia's 30 biggest superannuation funds have invested more than 33 billion in companies that are expanding fossil fuels globally. And so when I read Richard and David's book, this was my big takeaway. The money that we're investing for our future is investing in the industries that will guarantee, one, not that we won't just have no future, but also that there'll be no pension money in our future because they're investing in fossil fuels. So that was my sort of very quick summary of my takeaway of reading the section where you guys were talking about pensions. But do either of you want to sort of elaborate on this story?
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, or you?
Yep.
No, you're better read, and you're much better than me at explaining it.
I'd like to start with a different story, but one that popped up today. Chitan, whom we had on the show a few weeks back, who is the man on his, he's actually in the midway of his kind of his journey, his pilgrimage through India, about the finite Earth movement. So look him up and kind of follow him, subscribe and support him, definitely. He did a post this morning on LinkedIn about a plastic bottle. He was on a train, the guy next to him put a plastic bottle into the seat and he left, and the plastic bottle got left there as a bottle of water. And he basically said, you can't keep throwing things away. The point is the dredges of a barrel of oil, after you've refined all the fuel and done all the other stuff that you make of it, the dredges can make 60 plastic cups out of a barrel. We use 104 million barrels a day. That's 6 billion plastic cups a day. That's going to get thrown away. That's your plastic problem. If you want to have none of that plastic problem, you're going to have to use less of that oil. Because that stuff can't be poured away. It has to be made into something because it's so toxic. If you pour it away, you poison your oceans and your rivers. So what you do is turn it into plastic cups, so you throw it away, so you poison your rivers and your oceans.
Sorry, it's just so bloody stupid.
so that's how all that investment work in that way. To come back to that. And the point of it is, when you have such a lot of investment, it's very hard to manage good opportunities, which take a lot of attention. And the tendency then is to rely on this aspect that if someone else is buying it, then it's a good thing to buy. So this massive industry develops, which is called indexing, which is to follow what everyone else is doing, basically. And that's how the Australian superannuation funds ends up having all these investments into things like the oil, gas, and coal companies, into things like the tobacco companies, into all the things like the armament companies, and so on. It is not because they think these are necessarily good choices. It's because everyone is buying them, and they have a mandate which puts them into a situation to say, you got to cut your costs down so that more of the return goes to the people. And so the way to do that is just to follow what everyone else is doing, in which case your costs can really go down. You don't have to pay for the expertise. Someone smart somewhere is doing that, so that's okay. Well, the investment industry today has more money in indexing now than there are smart people in the smart investing in that way. So that means that the whole market, the vast bulk of the money that drives the market comes from the indexing. So the smart people are actually desperately trying to find their way through that massive crowd. And it's no longer actually following these sort of superannuations, no longer following the smart people. They've created their own momentum, and the smart people are trying to get out of that way.
Oh, it's just so crazy. Well, in Australia, there's one that's called Ethical, which is the only one that wasn't invested in the FFX 200 companies. FFX 200, is that fossil fuel?
Yes.
Yep. But you're right. Defence came up this week as remember I think I said 12 months ago or something. If you want to make some money, invest in the defence industry. Well, I was absolutely right. So I wish I had, but I don't invest in it. But who else? Because the other point I was making, David, is we put money into something for a future. and it's investing in the things that are going to guarantee we've got no future, but that will also destroy the economy, so that we're going to have no money at the same time. So it just seems like, just really, even the plastics that you were just saying, it's like,
And there's another side to this. It's not just that. As the boomers start to age, right? So the youngest boomer is 60 at the moment. They start to draw down heavily on their pensions before they die, and then they transfer it to the younger people. And as that goes on, the flow into the pension starts coming out. What happens in a Ponzi scheme when the money starts coming out? That's the
they
question.
widen the exits.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the companies need to start make even more money to pay for these pensions, right? So
they desperately try to do that, because that's the only way in which you can do so. So that worsens that. Yeah. At the same time, the amount of money that the amount of people actually selling the shares in order to try and get that as well is also going on. So the ones that go along and they try to keep it for the dividend they can get, the companies has to add even more pressure onto the environment to try and make it work.
Yeah.
And they're going to try and draw in more. You get into this very precarious state where it's a very fine balance as to whether you start pulling too much out so that it completely deflates. So it kind of says, this massive 20, 30-year trend where we've had stock markets keep going up because the pension industry since the 1970s have really picked up, into this, become mandated along in that way. The population is shifting up, the demographics of it. There are not enough young people putting into new pensions. We're at that stage where there won't be enough of them contributing, because their wages are also comparatively lower, in order to keep supporting the pension industry. The older people are drawing their money out and trying to get that out. The businesses have to put more pressure, worsening the crisis along, and there is going to be a net outflow from pensions. When that happens, the stock market turns.
Yeah. How far off do you reckon we are, David?
I think we are at that point. I think that the demographics drives it, and we are at that point where people, and the way it works out is, my peers, they go on holidays and they travel. That's funded by taking the money out of the pensions. So you see the cruise liners, you see all those things. They may do well in some sense at the moment in terms of the spending they have, but as for the whole industry and everything else, it relies on that fresh money coming in to support it. It's a great time for alpha, the sort of the skill people.
Fantastic time.
But it's terrible if you are kind of a typical superannuation.
Right. All right. Any more thoughts?
No, tough act to follow.
Yeah. It's one of those points, and I think we should bring it up every time, because Donald Trump's talking about introducing the Australian equivalent of the superannuation into the US, right? And that's a generational shift, before it has an impact. Because I remember when it was introduced, and I remember my dad sort of putting money away because they started later and all that sort of stuff. But even back then it didn't make sense. Anyway, the Secretary of War.
Yes, that's his new title.
Current name, yes.
Yeah. Pete Hegseth. God, when you look at the clowns that are over there, he's the one, right? So look, there's this situation with the killing of the people in the Caribbean. None of the argument stacks up. But anyway, who's going to be thrown under the bus? But what I thought was interesting was that the Signal Gate issue has come back up. The IG has released a report. It's considered the most reckless act by a defense secretary in modern history. If allegations are accurate, he cannot survive this. Indictments are not just possible; they are probable. And the difference between the other attacks and this is there's documented evidence that he actually did this. So Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. That guy. But we're talking about infrastructure. You were talking about Japan potentially selling some of its public assets, right? So I know that one of their big road infrastructure, what's it called, next something. They split that up into 3 different things, and I don't know. I think it's privately owned now. I'm not really sure, but as we're seeing in the UK, private ownership of something that should be considered part of the global commons, water. It's not going very well. There's people getting E. coli poisoning in the Thames. I mean, just the amount of money that they're being sued because people are getting sick, and there's a lot more sort of action that is happening. I mean, at some point, something's got to shift, and I think Macquarie in Australia own.
They used to. Right, they used to own part of Thames Water, I believe, through one of their funds, or maybe they owned it directly. I'm not sure. Well, it's a mess, right? Because you took a wholly owned public asset, you privatized it into various tranches, very much like the train system in the UK. And clearly, if you run it well, there are benefits with keeping the whole together in both these cases. But it was during the great privatization drive. But the problem you have when you privatize assets like this is the owners that buy them now control them and can structure them like any other company, which means I can lumber them with debt and take dividends out to pay for the purchase because I actually acquired assets on the cheap side. And that's what these owners did for a long, long time, and they neglected investments. And now when they've taken all the dividends out, they haven't invested enough, everything is crumbling. And there is a call for, bringing it back to state ownership or, fining them. At the end of the day, what it all means is that the man or woman on the street going to pay more for their water coming through the tap, because that's the only way you're going to be able to invest, is if you can charge more. And then you have a regulator saying you cannot charge more. That's a circle that cannot get squared.
Yeah.
But
they're never going to invest, right?
It's like Manchester United. It's basically you lend the money, you lend the company you bought a huge amount of debt, for you to become the owner, so that you can actually take the profit and have it pay you the debt.
Yeah.
And you can afford to do that. The company can afford to do that because you have no intention of improving the company.
Yeah, effectively. That's the whole idea, right? And you have to obviously question the competence of the people that sold these companies a long time ago. Oh, wait, they were politicians. I think that sums it up. But you're buying an asset with the company you acquire's own capital, because that's what you do when you lumber it with that. And then I get paid back through a dividend, and instead the company is saddled with that. It's a bonkers capital structure that is allowed because you take something that wasn't designed for being run like a private entity and you turn it into it because privatization was great.
And to be honest, I mean, it's how America becomes so indebted.
Yes, in some sense it is. Yes.
Japan and China lent American money effectively by buying its bonds, that allowed the kind of consumption to continue with the country running the deficit it does. So it's a very accepted approach within the kind of economics that we have. In whether you look at it as a nation or whether you look at it as a company, the part where it doesn't work is when you look at it in terms of that individual home economics in that way. Because then you realize, you see it, and you think, gosh, I can't do that. That guy keeps coming to my door and asking for more money.
Yeah. And I have nothing to pay him with, so he's going to start taking my furniture and my clothes and whatever.
Yeah. All right, Joe, unless you've got something, to me, it's all part of the great enshittification, which I don't apply just to the tech industry. And this is literally a case of enshittification because it's releasing massive amounts of sewage into the Thames.
And I should add, the other problem is regulator. The regulation was about the price of, the commodity, the water that people had to pay. There wasn't really no real regulation about the maintenance of the infrastructure.
No. I mean, again,
and that was
going to get you're going to get exactly the outcome of the system you created. It's like
the presumption is someone else will look after it. Eventually, the government. If I'm the company, if I'm the buyer, eventually the government will come in and lend me whatever money is needed to solve it. But it has to get there first before they will do it. In the meantime, I can take all the money. I'll fulfill my contract. I will buy it if the regulators, the politicians said we can sell it as long as the public is happy. So we set up regulations to make sure their bills don't go up by so much. I'm very happy with that because I've priced it and it works for me. And I've had my conversation with regulators about that. And I made sure that they don't actually regulate the part that I need to rely on the government for to give the funding at the end of it either. And so if all this happens as to say, okay, fine, we're going to take it all back, we deal with ourselves, I walk off having made my money, I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also going to be the expected outcome, right? Every time you bring in someone that primarily has a fiduciary obligation, that is the only thing, right? It's not. They're actually technically. Someone was talking to me about this and saying that technically, when a company decides to do things that's good for the environment instead of making money, they're actually committing a crime based on their fiduciary expectations. Their work is to be profitable and to make money, and if they don't do that, they're actually in breach of the agreement that got them there.
Yeah,
and absolutely.
And it's exactly why water shouldn't be privatized, right?
I think you have a very strong case for not doing it. And if you decide to go ahead with it, you need completely different safeguards than the ones UK thought up at the time.
Yeah.
And there you get to the root of the problem. If, like David describes, like Joe described, if you'd imposed a regulator that kept tab on the quality issues, the maintenance, and the price you could charge, you wouldn't have got paid very much for this company when you decided to sell it. And that was the point.
Yeah. Just another example of short-term thinking from our political leaders, right?
Absolutely.
I think maybe two more stories or one. I haven't had a chance. So, one of the stories I wanted to share. So I talked about this in my interview with Jan Omsen. I know David, you had a listen. So he's one of these people that just pays attention to everything that's going on from a planetary perspective. And we talked about the fact that there's going to be this burp in the Southern Ocean. So the Southern Ocean is the ocean near Antarctica. It's also the smock is in that area. So that's the other oscillation that is potentially slowing down. And they think it slowed down or stopped 10 years ago, which is why some of the extreme things that are happening across Australia are starting to happen because of that, right? But this heat burp could come out. So we're already seeing escalating heat. So if this burp happens, it's going to be a pretty big deal. Especially like if we get things under control, it's still going to release this heat. So it could sort of pump it up a fair bit. But the other story that I've been it's been popping up. Actually, first before that, the safest countries in the world have come out. It's Iceland, Ireland, New Zealand, Austria, Switzerland, Singapore at number 6, Portugal, Denmark, Slovenia, and Finland. So there you go. We're the only Asian nation mentioned. Bernie Sanders is on a bit of a mission on the AI front, and this mission is required I was having a private conversation with another friend of ours, Rohit, who's been on the show before, talking about AI and leadership and what they should do. But Joe, I don't know if you've had a chance to watch any of his interviews. He's been talking to the AI godfathers and stuff. But what's your takeaways?
In terms of what he's warning as the potential pitfalls,
the stuff he's highlighting,
he's on target. I mean, basically, what you have is what's happening with AI is essentially the whole story of oil, but accelerated, right? It's about energy, and it's about it's a very dirty business. I mean, that's the only way to describe it. It's coal mining with more cars. You know, I mean, it is the coal mining business, right? There's all the effluent, there's all the stuff that comes out of it. It is that thing, and it produces this one thing which is valuable. There is on that side, that's what's happening, and then there's the potential upside of it, which is what is tantalizing about the whole thing, right? You know, like the idea of fossil fuels. First of all, if we're trying to take this thing that's inherently there, and then we can release all this energy and potential from it, this is the big thing that it can lead us to do other things, and so we're drawn to it. AI is similarly there, as in, like, you know, for all the things that we talk about, the unpredictability of where it could be and where it could end up, there is also the possibilities of what it could produce. And for me, I'm thinking about this in terms of, like, when we get to super intelligence. I say when because it's a matter of time. The question of whether we can get there in an affordable sort of way, and it's a whole different thing. But when we do, and we get to super intelligence, and super intelligence begins to try and to solve the problem that we have, we might not like the solution that super intelligence decides is the solution. I mean, and we might be very happy with the solution as well. I mean, the whole concept of it is we're not supposed to be able to imagine what super intelligence will do, because it's, by its nature and definition, beyond our capability, right? But in that process, I mean, for me, I was thinking about the outcomes that could happen. We look at terrible, dystopian sort of things happening. And the thing about this is that it's dystopian if we, from a context, because I was thinking about, if, for instance, I won't say super intelligence, but say slightly more intelligent but powerful computation came along, and it had the ability to control all the resources on the earth. AI might, just as an example, might decide that the whole thing needs to be turned off. Not just itself, but the earth. As in, not destroyed, but said, put on pause.
Conservationship.
It might be, and it might well be that the answer to a long-term thing. So the thing about long-term thinking is, we tend to criticize people for not thinking long-term, and maybe when maybe sometimes they are thinking longer-term than we are, right? As in, you know, if I were looking at the world and I said, what should I do now? If I said, well, short term, I'm making money. Long term, we should be preserving the environment. And if I go very, very long term, then I might go, well, and therefore maybe we need to lose half the people, and then we get to the area of Thanos in the Marvel comics, right? Because that is what long-term thinking is really about, right? I mean, this whole place could do with far less people, with far fewer, far fewer people, so that far less is consumed, and therefore the pressure is all done. I mean, if we had everything we had today, and we had the population of the 1970s, I think life would be really much better. Right? I mean, that's
I know, Joe. Like, I got to jump in on that one, because I don't think, because the population argument is one that does frustrate me, because the like other oligarchs thinking that way, you betcha they're thinking that way. Let's take out 4 billion, which is basically the equator, north and south, right? Let's take out 4 billion. The Earth will replenish itself, and we'll bring the temperatures down, and we can get on with things from our bunkers, right? I have no doubt in my mind that that's what they're thinking. The problem is, it's the 4 billion people that they're focusing on are the people who are basically living in balance with Earth. They're not the ones that are out of balance. It's the people that they would potentially be saving, even though that would be a shit existence too, because you'd have the tech overlords as the CEOs of your cities and towns, as you know, that's the nerd Reich and what they want to achieve. So the idea that we just keep going but take out, like, 2, 3, 4 billion people, we've got to completely shift how we live. So another solution, based on what you just said, is what is it? AGI, super intelligent.
Super intelligence, yeah.
Yeah. It could turn off, like it would have the capacity, if it went rogue, which is one of the risks. It could turn off all of the machines and all of the technology that it could access, that all the energies requiring technology, which is basically everything in the world now, because everything is linked, to stop us using these energy sucking machines. That would have a bit of an impact.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we've seen HAL back in 2001. We've had Skynet back in whenever that was, 1980, wherever.
Yeah.
We've had The Matrix. We've seen iRobot. And they all have this turning off scenario featured in, and whether people end up with more people or fewer people depends on whether you are in Skynet or The Matrix. Whether you become the few that feeds the machine, or you become the resistance that fights the machine.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen all those things, and if science fiction is kind of like the great predictor of our future, because in some ways it inspires our future along the way as well.
Well, no. Well, the nerd rack are inspired by science fiction.
Yeah.
But the people who wrote that science fiction are basically saying they're like, people like Mark Zuckerberg are misinterpreting the message.
Yes. Yes. I do want to go to another perspective. I want to bring it up because it's important, and my mum mentioned it and so on. And that actually, if you really take the very long-term view, if you want to think about a very long-term view, what indigenous wisdom says is that we are one with the system.
Mm-hmm.
in that way. And all of these things, when you're one with the system, you accept that you are not the one who decides. And that's the big difference. So that's the part where you shape it in terms of a god, or whether you think of a natural system or whatever you have in that part. I've been having some conversations with people, this group AIM, which are kind of Australian indigenous mentoring group. And they talk about how to promote that indigenous thinking, the indigenous system along with it. And I had a conversation 2 weeks ago with a young man who was using AI to try and write a framework for good versus evil for the future superintelligence. To have them become aware that actually it's not all rational in that way. That that sense of wisdom, that there is such a thing as wisdom, which is different from the aspect of knowledge and rational thinking. Yeah.
Right. Well, look, I'm looking at the time. We've gone over. So, Deborah, good to have you here with us. We we stream this in multiple places, but we'd like to get a bigger audience. But we've always tried to attract it naturally rather than cheating, because that's kind of aligns with our integrity. But but we appreciate you being here and commenting. And David, at the end of the day, what we need is a fundamental transformation in human consciousness. And I think the indigenous cultures a huge part of that story that we need to embrace, and we're not. We're going in the opposite direction, right?
I
But
like to think of that as going to a new wisdom that's actually a really ancient wisdom.
exactly, yeah. Think of all of the countries that our ancestors conquered and
Yes.
destroyed local sort of cultures and traditions and spiritual models and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, we've got to go back before that time, and we've got to stop patting ourselves on the back as the conquerors, right? And
the one challenge with that kind of thinking for me has always been we like to go back to how it was just until it's just right. You know,
yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, we do want to go back 1960s. Yeah, okay, 61, just about then. We don't want to go back to just before that, you know.
Well, we need to at least buy as few clothes as we did back then, you know, stuff like that, right? But yeah, it's not about going back. It's about stepping forward with a new mindset.
Dare we say, make the world great again.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so next week it was awesome listening to Monica, wasn't it? She's fantastic, and really tough job. Next week we're going to have Simone Heng join us, and she is a specialist in the loneliness pandemic. So she does social connection, and she's written a couple of books on it, and she's quite the celebrity these days, isn't she, Joe? She's a really smart lady, and I think this is a big topic within the context of the poly crisis as well. So I'm looking forward to that. But what's keeping you distracted, guys? What a recommendation somebody can do something with?
I started reading what's it called? The new China playbook or something.
Huh? You muted yourself, Dave.
For me, it's my vegetable beds. I'm very excited as the first crop is going in. My winter crop is going in, and anyone can actually do them. Even if you live in an apartment, you can have a little bit on your windowsill in a big box that you attach.
So what are you growing?
This year will be everything, but the leeks are going in now. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Nice.
So it is the new China playbook, Ken Eugene, and I like the part where I haven't got very far, and you know, I usually don't read these kind of things very much. I usually don't read anywhere near enough, but I like the part where it talked about the rapid growth of China, and it said, you know, people talk about this system or that system and what causes it, and it says actually the way they see it is actually more like that there is a lot of innate potential that just hasn't been able to come out. So it's just like someone who's naturally a brilliant athlete, but hasn't been able to get on the track.
Right.
And has been cooped up in a room. And as soon as you allow them on the track, they start running, and you start looking at them, you think, gosh, you know, this guy can run. What could the training do? And it's a bit like that. And I want to take that as a distraction to when we look at the people we meet and the world we have, and actually start thinking of it and say, wow, am I really seeing amazing potential here? And it just needs to be released.
Yeah.
I think the view that the world needs to have with China is to look at it this way. Think of your life and see how a different set of parents kind of works, you know, in society, because you have that even in your own societies, different parenting styles, different results. And I think China is that sort of beast. It's a huge population that's been brought up by a different set of parents.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's very different. Even Singaporean parents compared to Australian parents is vastly different. I remember talking to mums here, and they're talking about how they use the cane, and I'm like, oh my god, that's just just different culture. Yeah.
Worked fine in London too.
Nice. Yeah. Joe?
So I realize that this is a show that probably has had a terrible carbon footprint as it was being produced. But I've been actually enjoying The old series that was produced, Grand Tour, the folks who were on Top Gear before, and when they left, they went on to Amazon, and all this it's all ancient history right now. The show is no longer in production, but it was this terrible show where I say terrible in inverted commas, where three blokes basically enjoyed their prolonged youth by going out and racing cars and testing all kinds of things, and most recently actually talked a little bit about oil and all the things that it produces in the world. So, again, terrible, but at the same time, horribly charming and charismatic. Which I think is what we need on the other side of things. You need to figure out that part of it as well, because as while we're being serious about all the different things that happens in the world, we do have to also work on that part of it, which is the charismatic aspect of it. We do have to work on that. We just can't be the person where we go like, well, talking to you is kind of depressing. We've got to bring the jokes.
I know, mate. Look, trust me, I know exactly what you're saying, but it's a really, really hard thing to do. The unbearable burden of knowing, right? It's like,
I don't know. I don't know if you're interested, Richard. I want to bring back Who's Tipping Over the Tipping Point.
Yeah, absolutely. It was
that was a very
good
30-minute comedy segment we did with Trislo and Nico and Lovo, where we look at the things around and says who's tipping over the tipping point, and basically we kind of have a laugh at these things.
I think we do a good job finding our laughs, especially there's a lot of dark humor. Is Jeremy Clarkson in that show, Joe, that you're just talking about?
I'm afraid so.
Yeah. I love the other two guys, but he's an asshole. He's just, and when his farm got flooded this year, I'm like, yeah, stick it, because he's an very obnoxious man. But anyway, a new series on Netflix, well, I think it's new, is Telemasca, and it's a fantasy series. I'm a fantasy head that goes way back, and it's about a group that tracks paranormal activities. So I've just started that. I think it's going to be on the edge of your seat. And if you're a Netflix person, Infinite is about to be dropped off Netflix. Well, it is here. I'm presuming that's a global thing. And it's about a group of people who they're not immortal, but they kind of are, because they keep being reincarnated, but they're reincarnated into different bodies, and then they bring the skills that go back hundreds of years into the future, and they're supposed to make the world a better place. And Mark Wahlberg's in it, and he has his shirt off a few times, and it's a really cool movie. So it's about to go off. So Infinite, if you're looking for a good yarn, I recommend it. But yeah, I think that's enough for now for everyone, right? Yeah. We've had some great chats here, great comments. Really appreciate people jumping in. Awesome to have Monica.
Yes.
And next week is our last show for the year. I am definitely looking forward to having a break after that. You too?
Christmas is always good.
Yeah.
After find somewhere not flooded.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So
I'm just pleased we managed to hit almost all of the things that I mentioned that we might talk about on the show.
Yeah, almost. There was one thing. Sorry, I tried to. Good intro, Joe. All right. See you guys.
See you.
See you. Have a good weekend.
Bye.